The illusion of balance. I always thought balance was the key to life. That's what yoga teaches you, right? Breathe in, breathe out. Find the center. For years, I lived by that philosophy. It wasn't just something I taught my students, it was the foundation of my life. I believed that if you nurtured something with patience and care, it would remain steady. If you poured love into something, it would flourish. That's what I thought about relationships, about trust, about love. But the thing about balance? Sometimes, when something tips too far in one direction, you don't restore it gently. You let it crash, and then you burn whatever's left. It all started when I met Sophie. She was another instructor at the studio, new in town, full of energy and warmth. From the moment we locked eyes, I felt something shift inside me. Her movements were fluid, effortless, like she wasn't just doing yoga, but embodying it. It was hypnotic. She had this infectious laugh, this way of making everything feel lighter, easier. And when she spoke to you, she made you feel like you were the only person in the room. I had never met anyone like her. We connected instantly. It was one of those rare, undeniable moments of chemistry that people write novels about. A glance during class turned into shared coffee breaks. Those coffee breaks turned into late-night conversations, into walks under the city lights, into mornings spent wrapped in tangled sheets, breathing in the scent of each other's skin. We fell hard and fast, two souls supposedly in sync. For a while, everything was perfect. Mornings spent stretching in sunlit rooms, whispered affirmations, slow kisses between classes. We built a routine that felt sacred. Our days revolved around our shared passion for yoga, teaching classes, exploring different practices, even traveling together for retreats. We dreamed of opening our own studio one day, a place where people could find peace the way we had. It wasn't just love. It was partnership, a bond built on movement, breath, and trust. Or so I thought. Because love, real love, is supposed to be solid. It's supposed to be unshakable, a foundation that doesn't crack under pressure. And yet, without even realizing it, I had been standing on fragile ground the whole time. I just hadn't looked down yet. And when I finally did, I realized I was already falling. The first doubts. At first, nothing seemed off. Sophie was just as affectionate, just as passionate about yoga, just as invested in our future, or so I thought. Life moved as it always had. We taught classes, planned for our own studio, and spent our mornings wrapped in the quiet comfort of routine. Every day felt like a step towards something bigger, something permanent. I trusted her completely. There wasn't a single moment in those early days where I questioned us, where I thought I needed to. But then, things started to shift. Slowly, quietly, in ways that were easy to overlook at first. It wasn't some big, dramatic change, just little things. A text she wouldn't answer right away. A call she'd step into another room to take. A fleeting look of hesitation before she kissed me goodbye. Small adjustments in her routine that seemed insignificant on their own, but when I looked at them together, they felt different. And the worst part? I couldn't put my finger on why it bothered me. Maybe because it was Sophie. She had always been open, transparent, never one to keep secrets. But now, there was a sliver of distance between us, something unspoken that I couldn't quite define. At first, I reasoned with myself. Everyone gets busy. Everyone goes through phases. It's nothing. But then it became a pattern. She'd come home later than usual, saying a client had booked a last-minute session. No big deal. Private clients were good money, and we both wanted to save up. But then the late nights became more frequent. She stopped mentioning her clients by name. More phone calls, more messages she wouldn't check in front of me. And the way she carried herself, it wasn't just exhaustion from work. It was something else. Something heavier. I still wasn't suspicious. Not really. But something in my gut told me things weren't quite the same. One night, as we were sitting on the couch, I casually asked about her new clients, just making conversation. She smiled, easy and unbothered, telling me she was picking up extra work because she knew I wanted to open the studio sooner. It's just a busy season, she said. People are looking for more one-on-one guidance. She reached for my hand, squeezing it reassuringly, her fingers warm and familiar. It made sense. And yet, that nagging feeling wouldn't go away. It wasn't loud, not something I could point to and say, there. That's the proof. It was more like an itch beneath my skin, an unease that settled in my stomach whenever she said she'd be home late again. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was being unreasonable. But the more I tried to ignore it, the stronger it became. I hated the way it made me feel, like I was paranoid, like I was searching for a problem that didn't exist. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the question that had started whispering in the back of my mind. What if I wasn't wrong? So, one evening, I decided to find out. Not in an obvious way. I wasn't going to accuse her of anything. That would make me look crazy. I told myself I was just being thoughtful, that I was going to surprise her, pick her up from the studio so she wouldn't have to walk home alone. But the truth? That wasn't my real motive. I wanted to see for myself, to prove, once and for all, that I was just overthinking. She had mentioned she'd be working late at the studio, so I left home about an hour after she did. I drove slowly, my hands tight around the wheel, trying to convince myself this wasn't a mistake, that I wouldn't regret this. But part of me was already bracing for what I might find. When I pulled up a block away from the studio, I sat there for a long moment, my heart pounding. I felt stupid, ridiculous, like some jealous boyfriend who didn't trust his own partner. But I got out of the car anyway. I stepped inside the dimly lit studio, my pulse quickening as I heard voices from one of the private rooms. I moved closer, careful not to make a sound. Through the glass window, I saw her, Sophie, and another woman, a client, a real one. They were mid-session, Sophie adjusting her posture, guiding her movements with that same soft patience I had always admired. There was nothing suspicious, nothing out of the ordinary. Just work. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, the tension slowly unraveling from my body. I felt almost lightheaded, like I had been holding onto something too tightly and was only now releasing my grip. My mind had played tricks on me. That much was clear. The doubt, the unease, the gut feeling, it had all been in my head. Sophie wasn't lying. She wasn't sneaking around. She was doing exactly what she had told me she was doing. And yet, instead of feeling relief, I felt something closer to guilt. I had let my own insecurities turn into suspicion, had nearly let them poison something good. That night, I didn't mention what I had done. I didn't tell her I had gone to check. Instead, I held her a little longer, kissed her a little softer, trying to shake off the feeling that I had been looking for a betrayal that didn't exist. And for a while, I convinced myself I had been wrong, that everything was fine, that I could let it go, until something happened that I couldn't explain. Doubt creeps in. For a while, things felt normal again. After that night at the studio, I told myself I had been overthinking. Sophie had been telling the truth. There was no secret affair, no hidden betrayal. Just late nights, extra clients, and a busy schedule. I forced myself to let go of the unease that had been gnawing at me, to bury the thoughts that had made me question her in the first place. And for a while, it worked. We fell back into routine, and I tried to ignore the way her energy still felt different. It wasn't something I could point to, nothing as obvious as before. Just small shifts, how she would be present, but not fully there. The way her smile seemed practiced, the way she would reach for my hand and squeeze it just a little too late, like she had to remind herself to do it. But I ignored it, because I wanted to believe in us. Then, one night, something happened that I couldn't ignore. It was late, close to midnight, and Sophie was already asleep beside me. Her breathing was slow, even, her body curled into the blankets in the way she always did when she was deep in sleep. I wasn't tired. I lay awake, scrolling through my phone in the dim light, my mind wandering in circles. Maybe I had been too paranoid before. Maybe I had let my own insecurities taint what we had. She had been honest. She had been working. I had seen it with my own eyes. Then I heard it. A notification. Not from my phone, from hers. I glanced over. Her phone was face down on the bedside table, but the screen lit up just enough to illuminate the darkness. I wasn't trying to snoop, but my eyes flicked to the message before I could stop myself. A name I didn't recognize. A man's name. I felt my chest tighten. Then the message came through. Tonight was nice. Thanks again. That was it. Nothing outright incriminating. Nothing obviously wrong. But my stomach twisted anyway. I stared at the screen, waiting, half expecting another message to follow. Something that would clarify what exactly that meant. But nothing else came. Just that one vague sentence, hanging in the air between us. I turned my head slightly, looking at Sophie. She was sleeping peacefully, curled up under the blanket like nothing was wrong. Maybe nothing was wrong. Maybe this really was just a client thanking her for a session. Maybe I was reading into it too much, letting my own insecurities get the best of me again. But I couldn't shake the feeling. That sick, uneasy feeling that something was slipping between my fingers, and I couldn't quite catch it. I tried to sleep, but my mind wouldn't shut off. The message replayed over and over in my head. twisting into 1,000 different meanings. Was it an innocent comment? A professional thank you? Or was there something underneath it, something hidden between the words? By morning, I knew I couldn't keep it inside anymore. As we sat at the kitchen table, drinking our coffee in the quiet of the early morning, I finally spoke. Are we okay? Sophie looked up from her mug, caught off guard. What do you mean? I hesitated, feeling stupid, but I had to say it. I don't know. I just feel like something's different. Like we're not as close as we used to be. Her expression softened. She set her coffee down and reached for my hand. Babe, I promise, everything is fine. I've just been swamped with work, that's all. I didn't even realize I was being distant, but I guess I've just been a little overwhelmed. I searched her face for any sign of hesitation, any flicker of something deeper. But if she was hiding something, she was good at it. Are you sure? I asked, because I needed to hear her say it. She smiled gently, squeezing my fingers. Of course. I love you. And if you're feeling like we haven't had enough time together, let's fix that. Let's take the weekend off. No work, no distractions. Just us. I wanted to believe her. So I did. We planned a weekend getaway, a little cabin by the lake, just the two of us. A reset. A way to reconnect. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I had been wrong about everything. But what happened that weekend would change everything. The truth I couldn't ignore. The cabin was perfect. Tucked away near the lake, surrounded by thick woods, isolated from everything. The kind of place where you were supposed to feel at peace. Where all the noise of everyday life faded away, leaving only the sound of wind through the trees and water lapping against the shore. That was the whole point of this trip, to reconnect. To shake off the doubts, the tension, the thoughts I couldn't seem to let go of. Sophie had been the one to suggest it, after all. Just us. No distractions. I wanted this weekend to prove me wrong. I needed it to. And for the first day, it almost did. Sophie was relaxed, laughing easily, curling up against me by the fireplace like she had no worries in the world. We cooked together, played cards, drank wine on the deck under the stars. It felt real. Normal. Like old times. Almost. Because no matter how much I tried to lose myself in the moment, that feeling, the one that had been growing in my gut for weeks, never really left. It just sat there, quiet but persistent, waiting. And on the second night, I found out why. It was late. Sophie had gone to bed a little earlier, claiming she was tired from all the fresh air. I had stayed up, sitting on the couch in the dim glow of the fire, staring at my untouched drink. My thoughts were tangled, looping over and over, trying to convince myself that everything was fine. Then, her phone vibrated. It was subtle, barely audible, but in the dead silence of the cabin, it might as well have been a gunshot. I turned my head. Sophie's phone was sitting on the kitchen counter, face down like always. Another vibration. Then another. A call. I moved before I could stop myself. Quiet, careful. I didn't pick it up. I didn't need to. The screen had already lit up, casting a faint glow across the dark wood. And there it was. A name. The same name I had seen that night in bed. The same man. I felt my heartbeat in my throat as the call ended, only to be followed by a message. Miss you already. My hands clenched into fists. Another message. Wish we had more time. She doesn't suspect anything, does she? Something inside me went ice cold. I stared at those words, my pulse pounding so hard it hurt. I had wanted to believe her. Wanted to believe in us. But there was no explaining this away. No misinterpretation. No paranoia. She was cheating on me. Right now, she was asleep in our bed, in my arms, while another man was texting her, wondering if she had gotten away with it. I forced myself to breathe, to think. Every instinct in me wanted to storm into the bedroom, wake her up, throw the phone at her, and demand the truth. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because if I exploded now, if I let her know what I had just seen, that would be it. She'd cry, apologize, maybe even lie, twist the truth, try to convince me I was wrong again. And maybe, in the heat of the moment, I'd fall for it. No, not this time. This time, I was going to be smart. This time, I was going to make her pay. So I set the phone down exactly where I had found it, took a deep breath, and walked back to bed like nothing had happened. Like I didn't know everything. Like I wasn't about to destroy her world the way she had destroyed mine. The perfect revenge. I woke up the next morning like nothing had changed. I kissed Sophie on the forehead, made us coffee, and watched as she stretched lazily in bed, looking so damn comfortable, so completely unaware of what I knew. It made me sick, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I played the part. The loving boyfriend. The man who believed every lie she had ever told him. And as she smiled at me over her cup, telling me how good it felt to get away from everything, I smiled back. Because I knew that by the end of the day, she'd regret every second of it. I spent the morning thinking, planning. Every time I looked at her, I imagined all the ways I could ruin her. Telling her family. Calling her out in front of all her friends. Sending screenshots of her texts to her clients at the yoga studio, turning her perfect little world upside down. But none of it felt right. No, I needed something better. Something that would hurt the way she had hurt me. And then, as we were sitting by the lake, watching the ripples on the water, an idea came to me. A perfect, devastating idea. She had no clue what was coming. Step 1. Make her feel safe. I spent the whole day making her believe everything was fine. That I was fine. I laughed at her jokes, kissed her in the sunlight, ran my fingers through her hair as we lay on the dock. I made her think this was the best weekend we'd ever had. She had no idea it would be her last. Step 2. Take away what she loves. That afternoon, while she was in the shower, I grabbed her phone. I knew her passcode, of course I did. And I did exactly what she had done to me. I texted him. I think he knows. I didn't send it right away. I held my finger over the button, feeling the weight of it. Because once I did this, there was no going back. Then I pressed send. And just like that, the cracks in her world had started to form. Step 3. Watch her panic. Minutes later, she came out of the bathroom, towel wrapped around her body, smiling like she had no idea her perfect little life was falling apart. Then she saw her phone, and I watched, amused, as her face drained of color. She grabbed it so fast she almost knocked it off the table. Her fingers trembled as she unlocked it, reading the message I had sent to him. I saw the exact moment panic set in. She whipped her head toward me, trying to mask the fear behind a casual tone. Hey, did you touch my phone? I raised an eyebrow. No. Why? Her lips parted, then closed again. She shook her head quickly. No reason. Just thought I got a weird message. She was crumbling inside. But I wasn't done yet. Step 4. Burn it all down. I let her stew in her fear for hours. I watched as she kept sneaking glances at her phone, as she barely touched her dinner, as she kept biting her lip, lost in thought. I could feel the anxiety radiating off of her. And then, just as the sun was setting, I pulled out my own phone. And I sent him another message. We need to talk. Now. I didn't have to wait long. His name popped up almost instantly. What do you mean? Did something happen? I looked right at Sophie as I typed my response, making sure she saw my smirk as I pressed send. Ask her. Her phone vibrated in her lap. She stared at it, her hands shaking. Then she looked up at me. And for the first time, I let her see it. The truth. The fact that I knew everything. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. She looked trapped, like a deer in headlights. And I just smiled. Because I wasn't done ruining her. Not yet. Her world falls apart. Sophie didn't speak right away. She just sat there, gripping her phone like it was the only thing keeping her upright, her fingers clenched so tightly around it that her knuckles had turned white. Her breathing had gone shallow, barely there, as if she was trying to make herself as small as possible, as if she believed that if she stayed still long enough, the storm brewing around her might somehow pass without touching her. But there was no escaping this. I could see the panic setting in, the way her mind was scrambling for an explanation, an excuse, any way out of this situation. And I let her sit in it. I let her drown in the silence that stretched between us, let her feel the weight of her own guilt pressing down on her. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she swallowed hard and forced out a shaky breath. When she spoke, her voice was light, too casual, too controlled, like she was clinging to the last thread of whatever illusion she thought she could still hold together. I don't know what's going on, she said, shaking her head slightly, her eyes darting between me and her phone as if searching for a way to reset the situation, to go back to 5 minutes ago when she still believed she had control. I think there's some kind of misunderstanding. I almost laughed. Even now, even with the evidence staring her in the face, even with her little side piece frantically messaging her, she was still lying. I leaned back in my chair, stretching my legs out in front of me, deliberately taking my time, savoring this moment. A misunderstanding? I repeated, letting the words roll off my tongue slowly, tasting the absurdity of them. I tilted my head, watching her squirm under my gaze. All right then, let's clear it up. Who is he? She flinched, just barely, but I caught it. A tiny, almost imperceptible movement. A brief flicker of fear that flashed across her face before she forced herself to go still again. Her lips parted slightly, and for a second, I thought she might actually try telling the truth. But then, as if on autopilot, she defaulted to the same script she had probably rehearsed in her head 1,000 times before. He's just a client, she said, her voice almost steady, almost convincing. She even managed a small, tight smile, as if she truly believed she could still talk her way out of this. I told you, I've been picking up more private sessions. That's all it is. I stared at her, letting the silence stretch between us again. She was good. She didn't stutter, didn't fumble over her words, didn't let her hands shake too much. If I hadn't seen the messages myself, if I hadn't felt that sickening pit in my stomach when I read his words, I might have believed her. But I had, and I wasn't going to make it easy for her. Right? I said slowly, nodding as if I was considering her words, as if I was actually entertaining the possibility that she was telling the truth. A client. And do all your clients text you in the middle of the night saying they miss you? Do they make sure you don't suspect anything? I watched as the color drained from her face completely. Her lips parted again, but this time, no sound came out. For the first time, she had nothing to say. And then, before she could even attempt to recover, before she could weave together some desperate, last-ditch lie, her phone vibrated again. We both looked at the screen at the same time. What the hell did you tell him? It was from him. And that was it. That was the moment Sophie broke. Her breath hitched sharply, her fingers tightening around her phone as if she could crush it in her grip, as if destroying the evidence would somehow make it all go away. Her chest was rising and falling too fast now, her breath coming in short, uneven gasps. I could see it. The exact moment she realized she had lost, that there was no way to explain this, no way to twist it into something innocent, no way to talk her way out of it this time. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, my voice quiet now, almost gentle, but laced with something far colder than anger. I gave you so many chances, Sophie, I said, watching the way her eyes filled with tears, the way her jaw trembled as she bit down hard to keep herself from crying. So many times to just tell me the truth. Her eyes darted around the room, like a cornered animal searching for an escape route, but there was none. She was trapped, and we both knew it. I didn't let her finish. I don't want to hear it, I said, cutting her off before she could even attempt to spin another lie. My voice was sharper now, final, an unmovable force that she wouldn't be able to break through. Not the excuses, not the fake tears, not whatever pathetic story you were about to come up with. The first tear finally spilled down her cheek, but I felt nothing. Not pity, not sadness, not even anger anymore. Just satisfaction. Because for the first time, Sophie wasn't in control. She wasn't calling the shots. She was trapped, and I wasn't done yet. I stood up slowly, towering over her as she shrank back into her seat, still clutching her phone like it could somehow save her. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice eerily calm, controlled in a way that made her tremble even more. You're going to pack your things. Tonight, you're going to get in your car and drive home. And when we get back, you're going to find somewhere else to live. She let out a shaky breath, her lips trembling as she tried to find the words, to plead, to do anything that might convince me to change my mind. Wait, no. I cut her off again, my tone as firm as steel. You don't get to speak anymore. A sob finally broke from her lips, the realization hitting her in full force now. But I didn't care, because this was what she deserved. And tomorrow, I'd make sure he got what he deserved, too. Finishing the job. Sophie left that night. She didn't argue, didn't beg, didn't even try to make excuses anymore. After that last message from him, she knew there was nothing she could say that would change the outcome. Nothing that could undo what had already been set in motion. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching as she packed her bags in silence. Her movements were mechanical, empty, like she was barely there, like she was moving on autopilot, her mind elsewhere, maybe still trying to process how quickly her perfect little world had collapsed around her. I wondered if she was thinking about him right now. Wondered if she was trying to figure out how to fix things with him instead of fixing things with me. But that wasn't my problem anymore. By the time she zipped up the last suitcase and turned to look at me, her eyes red and puffy, her face streaked with tears she hadn't even bothered to wipe away, I felt nothing. Nothing except the weight of my next move. You don't have to do this, she whispered, voice hoarse from crying. I let out a small laugh, shaking my head. Sophie, I already did. Her lips pressed together, her chin quivering as she exhaled shakily. She held my gaze for a moment longer, searching my face for something, anything that might signal a chance at redemption, a chance to undo this. But there was nothing left for her here. Goodbye, Sophie. I closed the door behind her, locked it, and stood there for a long time, listening to the sound of her car engine fading into the distance. I had won, but I wasn't done yet. Because Sophie wasn't the only one who needed to pay. Step 1. Find him. I already had his number. His name. But that wasn't enough. I wanted to know who he really was. And in the age of social media, it didn't take much to find him. A quick search, a few mutual connections, and suddenly, his entire life was laid out in front of me like an open book. And the best part? He wasn't single. Oh no. He had a fiancée. A beautiful, smiling woman who, according to her Instagram, was planning the wedding of her dreams. Someone who had no idea that the man she was about to marry had been sneaking around behind her back, whispering sweet lies into my girlfriend's ear while pretending to be committed to her. I stared at her picture for a long time, letting the weight of it settle, letting myself feel just how perfect this opportunity was. Because now, I wasn't just getting revenge. I was taking everything from him. Step 2. Drop the bomb. I took my time crafting the message. It had to be just right, direct, but not overly emotional. Cold, factual, impossible to deny. Hey, you don't know me, but I thought you should see this before you make any big life decisions. Then, I attached the screenshots. Every single one. The messages, the calls, the late-night confessions he had sent Sophie, the ones where he reassured her that I didn't suspect a thing. The ones where he promised her that soon, it would just be them. I hovered over the send button for a moment, taking one last deep breath. Then I pressed it. And just like that, his world was gone. Step 3. Watch it burn. I wasn't expecting an immediate response. But when my phone buzzed less than 10 minutes later, I knew the fire had already started. Who the hell are you? I smirked. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Because now, she knew. And I knew exactly what would happen next. She would confront him. She would demand answers. And no matter what lies he tried to spin, no matter what story he tried to create, he wouldn't be able to talk his way out of this one. I imagined the argument unfolding in real time. The shouting. The accusations. The betrayal sinking into her like a knife. And then, just as I expected, another message popped up. But this time from her. Thank you. That's when I knew it was over. Step 4. Move on. By the time I left the cabin, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. The weight that had been suffocating me, the doubt, the anger, the second-guessing, the pain, it was all gone. Sophie had lost everything. So had he. And me. I was free. I wasn't the guy who got played. I wasn't the fool who let himself be walked all over. I was the one who ended it on my terms. And that felt better than revenge ever could.